This country has had 115 Supreme Court justices. All but 7 have been white men. There has never been a black woman on the highest court in the land. On Thursday at noon, that changed.
I, Ketanji Brown Jackson,
do solemnly swear
that
I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Meet the newest member of the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. History was made on Thursday. In a moment, I'll speak with former Democratic Senator Doug Jones, who helped guide Jackson through her tumultuous Senate confirmation process. But first, let me take you back to 1998, when President Bill Clinton appeared before a grand jury in the investigation by independent counsel Kenneth Starr.
Statement that there was no sex of any kind, in any manner, shape, or form with President Clinton was an utterly false statement. Is that correct?
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yes.
It depends on what the meaning of the word is a classic. Why are we showing you that rather special moment in presidential rhetoric? Because the person asking the questions of President Clinton is this fellow, Sol Weisenberg. Within Kenneth Starr's team, which no one ever called gun-shy, Weisenberg was known for his hard-charging tactics. He leaned so hard to the right that he called himself a paleo-conservative. So it was quite something this week when Sol Weisenberg was asked to respond to the bombshell testimony from former Trump White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson. This is the smoking gun, he told the New York Times. There isn't any question this establishes a prima facie case for his criminal culpability on seditious conspiracy charges. So that's where we are. Even a self-described paleo-conservative who helped bring about the impeachment of Bill Clinton says there is enough to charge Donald Trump with a crime. And he's not the only hard-right lawyer saying so. Conservative former prosecutor Andrew McCarthy, who once wrote that Hillary Clinton should be prosecuted, this week he wrote in Rupert Murdoch's New York Post about how many years Donald Trump could face behind bars. On Wednesday, the January 6th committee's vice chair, right-wing Republican Liz Cheney, said that her fellow conservatives need to start coming to the same conclusion that Weisenberg and McCarthy reached. In fact, she laid out the case.
As we have shown, Donald Trump attempted to overturn the presidential election. He attempted to stay in office and to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power. He summoned a mob to Washington. He knew they were armed on January 6th. He knew they were angry. And he directed the violent mob to march on the Capitol in order to delay or prevent completely the counting of electoral votes. He attempted to go there with them. And when the violence was underway, he refused to take action to tell the rioters to leave. Instead, he incited further violence by tweeting that the Vice President, Mike Pence, was a coward. He said, quote, "Mike deserves it." And he didn't want to do anything in response to the Hang Mike Pence chants. It's undeniable.
It's undeniable. And yet Attorney General Merrick Garland, by all indications, is nowhere near to making that determination of criminal culpability. How is that possible? I mean, Garland has said time and again there will be consequences for those who breached the Capitol and those who paved the way for the attack.
The Justice Department remains committed to holding all January 6 perpetrators at any level accountable under law. We will follow the facts wherever they lead.
Okay, Mr. Attorney General, so when will Donald Trump be held accountable? I'm old enough to remember that Democrats rejoiced when President Biden picked Merrick Garland for the AG job. They celebrated the idea that the person whom Republicans kept off the Supreme Court would soon be the country's top law enforcement officer. And sure, there was some poetic justice to that. But what about actual justice? As far as we can tell, that's not happening yet. And don't take it from me.
I have yet to see any indication that the former president himself is under investigation. It's not a difficult decision to investigate when there's evidence before you.
Now, defenders of Garland often argue that he needs to appear apolitical, that he can't give the right any reason to paint him as a partisan. But guess what? They're already doing that.
We're going to see a reprise, I fear, of the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa riots, where they're going to try to use political violence to advance their ends. And the Department of Justice needs to step in and stop them. I halfway expect the Attorney General to be rioting alongside them.
Garland's defenders argue that he needs to remain independent, no matter how frustrated the president might be with the slow pace of the 1-6 investigation. And they're right. We all agree that no Attorney General should take marching orders from the president. But that gets to a bigger question, because the president appoints the AG. Did Biden pick the right person for this moment? Was a mild-mannered, cautious, centrist lawyer, once beloved of Republican senators like Orrin Hatch, was he the right person to defend our democracy and the rule of law while actively resisting rising authoritarianism on the right? Or would we have been better off with someone else, someone who gives quotes to Politico like this, quote, I think that there is compelling evidence that crimes against the United States were committed by the former president and any number of very close and top associates. Who spoke those words? Who sees clearly just how damning a case the January 6th committee has laid out for us? His name is Doug Jones. He's the former U.S. attorney who prosecuted the 16th Street Baptist Church bombers, who went on to serve as Democratic senator from Alabama, and yes, was on the Biden shortlist for the AG role, now held by Merrick Garland. And Doug Jones joins me now. Doug Jones, welcome back to the show. You said there is compelling evidence that Trump committed crimes against the United States. So can he be charged with a crime, in your view, if not multiple crimes, and which ones?
Well, Mehdi, look, I have also said, you didn't follow the rest of that quote. I've also said that while there is compelling evidence from the January 6th Commission, that is not the same as admissible evidence in a court of law. And I think everybody has to understand the difference between the two forums. A commission is a legislative body that can connect the dots using depositions, using hearsay, any number of things. That's not the same. They can tell the story. They can present the compelling evidence that gives a roadmap for the Department of Justice. But that is not the same as being able to have a testimony that can be used in a court of law where defense lawyers and the defendants have the right to cross-examine. So, yeah, there is compelling evidence. It's amazing to me the dots that were connected by this January 6th committee. I disagree with Congressman Schiff that there is no evidence that higher-ups are not being looked at. We've seen recently the seizure of John Eastman's phone. We've seen the search of Jeffrey Clark's house. There are things going on. It's just that we can't see the Justice Department by law deals in secrecy.
Those are good points. But, of course, the Clark phone seizure and the Eastman stuff all happened in the last week, 10 days that we learned about it. The 1-6 attacks were 18 months ago. Do you understand why people are frustrated with Garland, who, according to Adam Schiff, I know you disagree with him, doesn't seem to be investigating Trump himself? People around Trump, yes. Schiff says no evidence of Trump himself. Do you understand why people are frustrated, why so many people are saying their job should have gone to Doug Jones or someone else?
Well, I don't, look, I don't get into the nomination process. But certainly I understand people that have never been part of the criminal justice system and hasn't been on the side of the grand jury and the investigating or defending people can be frustrated. You know, it took us 40 years to prosecute the 16th Street Baptist church bombing cases, and there was an incredible amount of frustration there. I get that. I feel that. But I do believe that this Justice Department is moving. They are following their rules and their law, and they're doing it in a very methodical way. We cannot rush this process. This is beyond, this is not a bank robbery case. This is not just your average fraud case. This involves the President of the United States, the former President of the United States. So in addition to stringent evidence standards, there's also going to be some very serious policy questions and the tug between nobody should be above the law versus what we are going to do when we get a President of the United States, a former president, as a defendant in a criminal trial.
we 100% agree. The bar is high on this one. This is no ordinary case. We agree on that. I would just say, just for our viewers' purposes, this isn't just you saying to me, well, you know, it's the DOJ. We have to understand. Adam Schiff is a former prosecutor. He's the head of the House Intelligence Committee. He's a committee member. I mean, he understands the justice process, too, and he seems frustrated. Ruben Gallego, other members of Congress are also saying, where is the DOJ? And there does seem to be a lack of urgency on the part of this administration. Just this month, in the middle of the 1-6 hearings, we saw Merrick Garland going off to Ukraine. We see Joe Biden meeting with world leaders in Europe. He's taking selfies right now. Many would argue he should be back in the U.S. leading on the abortion issue.
But let me tell you something, Mehdi, with all due respect, people that act from a sense of urgency in the criminal justice process usually screw it up. Okay, they get sloppy, they overlook things, they don't get the things. You cannot do this from a sense of urgency. The urgency happened on January 6th. They've got over 800 indictments. And we cannot operate. The Justice Department should never operate simply from a sense of political urgency or even legal urgency. There are processes in place that I think take some methodical preparation and examination by experienced people. And that's what Merrick Garland has brought to the table. He's put together a hell of a team to try to get to the bottom of this. I think they're moving as quickly as they can.
Again, I keep half agreeing with you. You're right. There shouldn't be urgency in a legal process. But the reality is the person at the center of this process could be president again in 2 years in charge of that DOJ. So there's urgency whether we like it or not. The presidential election timetable is not in our hands. Look, on the foreign trip that Joe Biden made, he made some news Thursday on the topic of the filibuster, which you and I have discussed before on this show. Have a listen.
I believe we have to codify Roe v. Wade in the law. And the way to do that is to make sure the Congress votes to do that. And if the filibuster gets in the way, it's like voting rights. It should be, we provide an exception for this, require an exception to the filibuster for this action to deal with the Supreme Court decision.
Well, you just made some news saying you would support changing the filibuster rules to codify abortion rights broadly across the country.
Right to privacy is not just abortion rights, but yes, abortion rights.
Look, I'm glad he's finally called for that. I'm slightly frustrated it's taken so long. But I have to ask you, Doug Jones, who is to say the Supreme Court wouldn't just knock down any bill codifying Roe? And just Thursday, they gutted the EPA's ability to tackle climate change. And so I wonder, why aren't more Democrats talking about a plan for the court itself, not just term limits for justices, but expanding the court, rebalancing the court after Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell packed it?
Well, I think because they're talking about reality. And reality is that you're not going to pack the Supreme Court. We've got to be very practical here. We can talk about pie-in-the-sky things that we would love to do if we had, an 80-person majority, but we can't do that. And you're not going to pack the Supreme Court. It's not going to happen. And I understand that that's frustrating to a lot of people, but it's frustrating to the very same people who should have made sure that we were putting people in place voting for the last 20 years. Republicans did that, and now they have the court, and we've got to get people organized and get out there to vote. I do think you're right. It would be a challenge. Anything that the Congress does is going to get challenged in a court of law, but we've got to make sure we do it. That doesn't mean that we don't do it. We've got to do everything we can in the states, get people out to vote, get the things changed that we can in the states, and get the Congress changed. I am glad to see the president wanting a carve out for the filibuster on abortion rights. I think it would be very, very important to do that. It is, as we've talked about, Mehdi, a slippery slope, because if we don't get out there and vote, and I say we being a Democrat, we're going to have a Republican president and a Republican Congress that will undo everything.
Here's my issue, Doug Jones, where you say pie in the sky. And I accept it's not an easy lift to, it hasn't been done for several decades, but it has changed size many times before the Supreme Court. In fact, the Republicans brought it down to 8 for an entire year in 2016. I understand it's not easy and it's an ambitious goal. But if you're saying it can't be done, then what you're saying then is the Supreme Court can shoot down abortion rights, shoot down gun rights, shoot down voting rights, allow Republican gerrymandering, allow independent state legislature theory, which they plan to do later this year, shoot down the separation of church and state. And Democrats can do nothing. You're saying there's nothing we can do as that rogue court basically overturns precedent, overturns laws.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all, Mehdi. You're misinterpreting.
So what can be done?
No, that's not what I said. I said Democrats can do a lot of things. They can get their butts out and vote. They can start electing people and get a majority in the United States Senate and start putting these things on the table.
But with respect, that doesn't change the Supreme Court.
Maddie, let me finish, okay? Let me finish here. Democrats can't just wave a magic wand. We've got a 50-50 vote in the United States Senate. We've got only a 10-vote majority in the House. We can't wave a magic wand and get things changed. We've got 3 branches of government. The Constitution set that up, and we can't magically change all of that. And we've had 9 members of the Supreme Court for more than just decades. It's been for like a century or more now. And it generally worked. But it swings, and it swings because of the way that people vote and who they put into office. I think Democrats right now they're frustrated because they did not pay attention to the courts for so long, and now look and see what's happened. So they have to use additional means to try to expand the court. Franklin D. Roosevelt tried that. It didn't. It got some changes in the court. We've got to make sure that we get people energized. Joe Biden's got to use the bully pulpit a little bit more. I think he's starting to use it, I think, a lot more. I think there's some things, executive action, that can be done, and there's some things that we can do. But the main thing is these midterms are coming up.
I understand. I understand. You want more Democrats in. I get that. But unless you're going to do something about the court, you're not answering my question. I did let you finish. How do you stop the court from shooting down any law that the Democratic Senate and House passes?
You have to get people out to vote. You cannot just stop something any more than Republicans could have stopped it years ago when the Warren Court was doing things they didn't like. That's not the way our country was set up to work, Mehdi, that if you just don't like something, you change it in a way that gets your way. You can't. It is not my way or the highway. That is not democracy as we know it and how it works. We've got a constitutional system that we need to abide by. And I mean, the Republicans. About McConnell. I think people need to remind the American public every day that the only person in American history that has single-handedly changed the number of Supreme Court justices was Mitch McConnell, and he did it for over a year. And people need to be reminded of that, and people need to use these because this is going to take some. It took 50 years to overturn Roe v. Wade. Do you think we're going to?
We agree that Mitch McConnell. We agree on the impact of Mitch McConnell. I'm just wishing Democrats would behave more like Mitch McConnell. Last question for you. We're out of time. I've got to ask you one last question. A major historic moment on Thursday that you were involved in. Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmed to the Supreme Court. What is your reaction to those images we played earlier of her being sworn in?
I was emotional. Once again, this was such an amazing day. It was such an amazing thing for me to be a part of, that our Supreme Court now looks like America. It looks so much more like America than it did just 3 hours ago when I watched her first tape this. It is going to be, and that is also something, Mehdi, I think we ought to do and think about. She is a consensus builder. Maybe she can have some effect on this. There is hope in the air with her on that court, and we need to see how that turns out. So it was an amazing day and a great day, and I'm so proud to have been part of it, and I'm so proud of her.